1951. Three men dragged Bumpy Johnson's brother into a warehouse at 1:40 a.m. That door slammed shut forever. No screams, no corpses. Just three bastards who walked in alive and crawled out erased. When a man can break bones, shatter lives, and still leave you breathing. What the hell is more terrifying than death? The phone rang once. Bumpy Johnson's hand closed around the receiver before the second ring could start. His knuckles still carrying the bruise from last week when a numbers runner tried lying to his face and learned that lying required teeth. No fumbling. No confusion. Calls at this hour were never accidents. They were declarations. The voice belonged to Claude, a man whose fingers trembled when he counted bills but stayed steady when delivering the kind of news that turned apartments into crime scenes. 3 sentences. Your brother. Warehouse off the Bronx tracks. Gone about an hour now. Bumpy stood in the center of his living room. Receiver pressed hard enough against his ear that the plastic creaked. He did not ask who took him, did not ask why. Asking meant you did not already know, and not knowing meant you were not the man people feared you were. He counted to 18. Slow. Deliberate. Let every bastard listening on both ends of that line hear what happened when control wrapped itself around rage and squeezed until only the useful parts remained. When he spoke, his voice came out flat, drained of everything except instruction. Get everyone who knows how to end things. 40 minutes. 3 blocks over. A metal lunch pail hit concrete outside a loading dock, and the sound cracked through the alley like a vertebra snapping under boot heel. The men working graveyard shift froze mid-step because they understood before their brains caught up. Someone's brother. Someone civilian. Someone whose name you did not drag into a world built on boundaries so old they had turned into scripture. Across the rail yard, warehouse lights stuttered. On, off, on, off. A rhythm no electrician planned. Distress dressed up as malfunction. And every man within 6 blocks read it like Morse code tapped out in panic. The people who were there that night, the ones who survived long enough to grow gray and cautious, still will not say his brother's name out loud in certain rooms, as though speaking it might wake something that learned to sleep light and angry. Harlem did not move. Bars locked their doors early. Street corners emptied. Even the cops, who usually rolled through after midnight just to remind everyone whose laws mattered, seemed to understand that whatever was unfolding had already been written in a ledger kept by men who did not wear badges. The city inhaled and held it. What came next was not justice. It was correction. And correction, delivered by Bumpy Johnson, did not knock before entering. He hung up the phone and walked to the closet. Did not reach for a gun, reached for his hat, his coat, and a small leather notebook where names lived in columns sorted by what they owed, and what they could do when the bill came due in currency that was not money. He did not need to write anything new. The list was already there, memorized, cross-referenced in his head like a blueprint for demolition. 12 men, 3 crews. All of them the kind who understood loyalty was not a word you spoke in church. It was a thing you proved when the ask involved ruined knees and lifetime silence. The problem was simple and unforgivable. His brother ran a dry cleaning shop on Lenox, pressed shirts, smiled at old ladies, had a wife and 2 daughters who wore Sunday dresses and did not know their uncle kept the neighborhood running on fear so precise it looked like respect. Grabbing him was not strategy. It was provocation. Someone wanted Bumpy to react like the animal they needed him to be so they could justify whatever power grab came next. That meant the rules. The ones that kept Harlem from drowning in its own appetite had just been shredded by men too desperate or too stupid to understand what they had started. Bumpy stepped into the hallway and locked his door behind him. 2 men waited by the stairs. One held a hand-drawn map. The other held a watch. Neither one said a word. The plan had been rehearsed in basements where nothing got written down, and repeating what you heard was how you got your tongue cut out and mailed to your mother. Survival was not about improvisation. It was about preparing for the night someone decided your family was acceptable collateral. And when that night came, you did not negotiate. You did not make threats. You moved with the kind of surgical precision that made people believe you had been hoping for this excuse since birth. Phone calls spiderwebbed through the dark. No wasted words. Just coordinates and arrival times, and the understanding that if you were being called, you had already agreed to every consequence that followed. This was not a rescue. It was a message, written in fractured bone and delivered to every crew in 5 boroughs. When civilians enter the game, rules stop being guidelines. They become enforceable. And enforcement, in the hands of someone who spent 20 years learning how power wears patience like a mask, does not leave room for apologies. Bumpy walked into the street. 3 men were about to discover the difference between taking someone and keeping them alive long enough to regret it. The warehouse crouched 200 yards from the Bronx rail line, wedged between a meatpacking plant that had been gutted 10 years prior and a stretch of cracked asphalt where weeds grew through engine oil stains. Brick walls wept, rust from rivets that had corroded down to orange dust. Windows covered in plywood so rotted you could punch through with your palm. The kind of structure the city abandoned because tearing it down cost more than pretending it did not exist. Inside, the air tasted like iron left in rainwater. Metallic. Sour. The smell of things that had been wet too long and dried wrong. 3 men stood guard. Not professionals. Not even competent. Just bodies someone hired because they were big enough to look threatening and dumb enough to believe intimidation was the same as power. One carried a baseball bat with electrical tape wrapped around the handle. Another had a length of chain coiled around his fist, the links thick enough to crack ribs. The third kept a crowbar propped against the wall within arm's reach. No guns. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was believing Bumpy Johnson would walk through that door alone. Hat in hand. Ready to beg. They leaned against the wall near the loading dock, smoking cigarettes that filled the room with haze. One of them told a joke about a priest and a stolen car. Another checked his watch for the 4th time in 10 minutes. The one with the chain stared at the man tied to the chair in the center of the room and grinned like he had won a bet. His teeth were crooked. His breath smelled like cheap whiskey and onions. He kept flexing his fingers around the chain, testing the weight, imagining what it would feel like to swing it. The man in the chair was Clean Willie, face swollen on the left side where knuckles had introduced themselves to. Cheekbone. Split lip crusted over with fluid that was not quite transparent. Hands bound behind the chair with rope pulled so tight his fingers had gone pale and numb. He was not crying, was not begging, just breathing slow and shallow, conserving energy the way you do when panic is a luxury you cannot afford. His shirt, the one he had pressed himself that morning, was torn at the collar. One shoe missing. He kept his eyes on the floor, counting the cracks in the concrete like a man trying to stay sane by giving his mind something to do besides imagine outcomes. The guards had no concept of what they were holding. They thought they had leverage, a bargaining chip, a way to drag Bumpy into a room where he would have to trade something valuable or watch his brother's face get uglier. That was the plan someone had sold them. That was the logic. And they swallowed it whole because none of them had ever seen what happened when you backed a man like Bumpy Johnson into a corner where mercy was not just unavailable, but strategically inadvisable. People who were in Harlem that winter, the ones who lived long enough to watch their grandchildren grow, still do not talk about what happened inside that warehouse except in whispers behind locked doors. And even then they speak in code, as if the walls themselves kept records. No police ever wrote a report. No hospital ever logged the injuries. It existed only in the memory of men who learned that some nights change you at a molecular level. The shortest guard flicked his cigarette toward the door. Ash scattered across concrete. He laughed and said something about how Bumpy was probably stuck in traffic. Maybe stopped to get flowers for the negotiation. The one with the chain said Bumpy was sitting at home doing math, trying to calculate exactly how much his baby brother was worth in cash versus reputation. The third guard, taller and quieter, did not laugh. He kept staring at the door like he could feel something coming. Like some animal part of his brain understood that plans built on assumptions about other men's cowardice had a structural flaw that revealed itself the moment those men stopped being afraid and started being surgical. Outside Vor, a truck engine idled 3 blocks away, the sound low and steady like a heartbeat. A door opened without creaking. Footsteps moved along the perimeter of the building, avoiding gravel, sticking to dirt paths where boots did not announce themselves. 12 men split into positions they had drilled in basements and back alleys, where asking questions was how you got told to leave permanently. No talking, just hand signals and synchronized watches, waiting for 3:30 in the morning, the hour when guards stop scanning for threats and start staring at nothing, when exhaustion whispers that maybe nothing is coming. That is when amateurs stop being useful, not because they lack strength, because they lack the paranoia that keeps you alive when every shadow might contain someone who has been planning your humiliation for hours. The men inside believed they were safe because no one had come yet, believed they had time because time had been generous so far. They were about to learn that belief. When it runs headfirst into preparation, does not survive the collision. Stupid violence starts when weak men convince themselves no one is watching. These 3 had convinced themselves. In 90 seconds, they would understand how fatal that assumption could be. 12 men, 3 crews of 4. No radios, no contingency plans written on paper that could later be found folded in a dead man's pocket. Just timing and the kind of trust that came from working together long enough to know who hesitated and who put the target down before it finished turning around. Bumpy stood in the shadows across from the warehouse, eyes tracking movement through the gaps in the boarded windows. He had a map in his coat pocket, hand drawn in pencil, every exit marked, every sight line calculated, every choke point highlighted in red. He did not look at it, had not looked at it for 2 hours. The layout lived in his head now, rotating in 3 dimensions. A mental blueprint of how 12 men would move through that space like water filling a container. The crews were layered. First team through the loading dock. Second team, blocking the side exit near the tracks where the tall grass grew high enough to hide a running man. Third team outside, cutting off the street in case panic made someone fast and stupid. No guns, not because Bumpy was being cautious, because guns were loud and loud brought police, and police brought questions, and questions brought lawyers, and lawyers brought everything into the light where it could be examined and catalogued and used against you in rooms with court reporters and jurors who believed in justice the way children believed in Santa Claus. This was not about killing. Killing was easy. Killing was what amateurs did when they ran out of imagination. This was about control, about demonstrating to 3 men, and through them to everyone who heard the story later. What happened when you mistook patience for weakness? The instructions had been delivered in person, in voices barely above a whisper, in rooms where the doors were locked and the curtains drawn. No shouting when you go in, no grandstanding, no speeches, and most importantly, leave nothing behind that can talk. No shell casings with rifling marks, no weapons with serial numbers, no witnesses who were not already complicit. That meant discipline, meant controlling the adrenaline that made men want to prove something to each other, Men who made plans like this and lived long enough to execute them more than once understood something fundamental about documentation. And you could see that understanding in the way none of them ever carried notebooks, or wrote down names, or kept records of any kind, except the ones tattooed into memory where subpoenas could not reach them. Bumpy checked his watch. 3:28. 2 minutes. He did not need to give a signal. The men around him had done variations of this enough times to know that when the second hand swept past 12, you moved. And you did not stop moving until the objective was secured, or you were the one leaking on the floor. Amateurs fought with emotion, with anger, with the need to prove they were tougher than the next guy. Professionals fought with timing. And timing, when executed with the precision of men who had spent years learning to turn violence into choreography, looked less like a fight and more like inevitability. Inside the warehouse, the guards were still talking. One had started a story about a woman he claimed to have met in a bar on Fordham Road. Another was leaning against a support beam with his eyes half closed, fighting sleep and losing. The third was staring at Clean Willie, trying to decide if the swelling on his face needed more work or if they should save it for when Bumpy arrived so he could watch. None of them were watching the door. None of them heard the metal groan when the lock broke. The first crew came through low and fast. 2 men on the door with a pry bar that snapped the bolt like a chicken bone. The sound was sharp but brief, swallowed by the ambient noise of the rail yard and the wind scraping trash across asphalt. By the time the guards turned their heads, 4 men were already inside, closing distance with the efficiency of people who had practiced this in warehouses just like this one. The guard with the chain got his hand halfway up before someone grabbed his wrist and twisted it backward with enough force that the joint separated with a wet pop. The chain hit the floor and skittered across concrete, links clanging like coins. His mouth opened, but no sound came out because the pain had not reached his brain yet. The second guard, the one telling the story, took a knee to the solar plexus that folded him like a wallet and sent him to the ground gasping for air that would not come. The third one, the tall, quiet one who had been staring at the door, tried to run, made it 4 steps before hands caught him by the shoulders and introduced his face to the brick wall with enough velocity that his nose flattened and cartilage crunched, and his legs forgot how to hold weight. Bumpy walked in last, did not look at the guards sprawled on the floor, looked at his brother, stepped over a man whose arm was bent in a direction arms were not designed to bend, pulled a knife from his coat, the blade worn smooth from years of use, and cut the ropes binding Clean Willie's wrists in one clean pull. Did not ask if he was okay. Asked if he could walk. Clean Willie nodded. Bumpy steadied him when his legs wobbled, handed him off to one of the crew, then turned to face the 3 men bleeding on concrete that was already darkening beneath them. He did not raise his voice. Did not need to. You do not survive what comes next. Not the way you are now. He gestured toward the door. His crew dragged the guards out one by one, leaving smeared trails on the floor, loaded them into a truck idling in the alley. The truck would take them somewhere quiet, somewhere they could be educated about the difference between taking someone and keeping them. Amateurs hit with their fists. Professionals hit with time, and time, in the hands of men who understood its weight, did not forgive. The first guard broke in under 4 minutes, not because Bumpy's crew used pliers or hammers or any of the tools amateurs reach for when they think pain is persuasion. They used silence. Sat him in a wooden chair in the back of the truck, hands zip-tied to the frame, and let him listen to his own breathing for 3 minutes straight while nobody said a word. By the time someone finally spoke, his imagination had already done the work. He gave up a name. Vincent Rossi, a social club on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, the kind of place where old men played cards in back rooms and younger men made decisions that shaped neighborhoods 6 miles away. Bumpy stood outside the truck, listening through the cracked door, and the pieces started fitting together in ways that made his jaw tighten. This was not about his brother. Never had been. Clean. Willie was bait, the kind you use when you want a predator to come charging out of the brush so everyone can see him for what he is. Someone wanted Bumpy to kick down the door of that social club with a gun in each hand. Wanted him to paint the walls in front of witnesses, in front of cops who could not ignore it, in front of a public that would demand he be put down like a mad dog. And once Bumpy was in custody or in the ground, Harlem would be open, unprotected, ready for new management. The second guard confirmed it without meaning to. Started babbling about how they were supposed to rough up the brother just enough to make it look real. How someone told them Bumpy would show up alone and angry. How this was supposed to be easy money for a night's work. He did not know who gave the orders, just that the money came from someone connected to people who wanted Harlem carved up and redistributed to crews that played by different rules. The people who were old enough to remember that winter. The ones who still gather in barbershops on Lenox Avenue and talk in half-finished sentences. Still argue about who was behind it, which family out of Brooklyn or which political machine downtown. But none of them argue about what happened to the plan itself. Because the plan died that night in a way that made sure nobody tried it again for a decade. Bumpy walked to the front of the truck and told his driver to kill the engine. Stood there in the dark, hands in his coat pockets, breathing slow and even while his mind ran calculations. If he went to that social club, he played into their hands. If he did nothing, he looked weak. The answer was neither. The answer was to change the game entirely, not kill them. Killing made martyrs. Killing gave their friends a reason to escalate. What you did was erase them, take away their legitimacy, their ability to operate, make them ghosts in their own city. He turned to the man holding the second guard and spoke in a voice so calm it sounded like he was ordering breakfast. I want names. Everyone in that club who touched this. Everyone who passed money. Everyone who knew. Then I want their routines. Where they eat. Where they drink. Who they owe. Who owes them. The guard started talking faster. Gave up 3 more names. Described a meeting 2 weeks prior where Vincent had bragged about a plan to provoke the N.U.S. Rio in Harlem into doing something stupid so the city would have to intervene. Bumpy did not flinch at the word. Had heard it his entire life. What mattered was the admission, the confirmation that this was orchestrated, that his brother's swollen face was just a prop in someone else's play. He walked back to where Clean Willie was sitting in the passenger seat of another car, wrapped in a borrowed coat, face still puffy but eyes clear. Bumpy leaned in through the window. You are going to stay with Marie in Yonkers for 2 weeks. You are not going to ask why. You are not going to argue. Clean, Willie nodded, understood without being told that the less he knew, the safer he was. Bumpy squeezed his shoulder once, the only display of affection he would allow himself, then stepped back and signaled for the car to leave. The third guard, the tall one who had tried to run, was still conscious, but barely. Bumpy crouched down next to him where he sat slumped against the truck tire, face a mess of swelling and split skin. Tell Vincent something for me. Tell him I know. Tell him I am not coming tonight. Tell him I am coming slow. The guard's eyes widened. That was worse. Everyone in this world knew that fast violence was survivable. Slow violence meant you had time to think, time to plan, time to take apart everything you built piece by piece until there was nothing left but the memory of what you used to be. Bumpy stood and walked back to his own car. His crew loaded the 3 guards into a van that would drop them at a hospital in New Jersey, with instructions to keep their mouths shut or find out what happened when you broke promises to people who remembered faces. He sat in the back seat and watched the warehouse disappear in the side mirror. Someone had tried to play him, tried to turn him into the villain in a story they were writing. But Bumpy had been writing stories in Harlem for 20 years, and his pen was steadier. They did not need his brother. They needed Bumpy to make a mistake, and the only mistake he made was letting them think they understood how he operated. The door exploded inward at exactly 3:32 in the morning. Not kicked, not shouldered. Rammed with a piece of steel pipe that bent the hinges and sent the whole frame tilting like a broken jaw. The sound hit the guards before their brains could process what it meant. By the time they turned, 4 men were already through the gap, moving low and fast, spreading across the warehouse floor like spilled mercury. The first guard, the one with the chain, got his hand up to chest height before someone grabbed his wrist and rotated it backward with the kind of force you use when you want bone to separate from socket but not break through skin. The wet pop echoed. The chain dropped, clattered across concrete like loose change scattered at a funeral. His knees buckled, but he did not fall because the man holding his arm kept him upright. Suspended in that moment between standing and collapsing, pain rushing up his shoulder in waves that made his vision white out at the edges. The second guard opened his mouth to yell, got halfway through the first syllable before a forearm caught him across the throat and shut down everything below his chin. He folded forward, hands going to his neck, trying to pull air through a windpipe that had just been introduced to the concept of blunt force applied with surgical precision. He hit the floor on his knees, then his face, gasping like a fish on a dock. The third guard, the tall, quiet one who had been staring at the door all night like he knew something was coming, tried to run, made it 6 steps before hands caught him by the collar and the belt, and used his own momentum to accelerate him face first into the brick wall. His nose flattened on impact. Cartilage crunched. The sound was wet and immediate, like a tomato crushed in a fist. His legs stopped receiving signals from his brain. He slid down the wall and pooled at the base like laundry someone forgot to fold. Bumpy came through the door, but he did not look at the guards, did not acknowledge the 3 men sprawled across the floor in various stages of consciousness and regret. He walked straight to the center of the room where his brother sat tied to the chair. Face swollen, hands bound so tight the rope had carved grooves into his wrists that would leave scars for months. Bumpy pulled a knife from his coat pocket. The blade was old, worn smooth from decades of use. The kind of tool you kept, not because it was sharp, but because it had proven reliable. He cut the ropes in one pull. The fibers separated with a sound like tearing fabric. Clean, Willie's hands fell forward and he flexed his fingers, trying to get circulation back into tissue that had gone pale and numb. Bumpy did not ask if he was okay, did not waste time on questions that did not change the next move. Just asked the only thing that mattered. Can you walk? Clean, Willie nodded. His voice came out hoarse but steady. I can walk. Bumpy helped him stand, one hand under his elbow, waiting while his brother's legs remembered how to hold weight. Handed him off to one of the crew who guided him toward the door, toward the car waiting outside, toward safety that should have never been compromised in the first place. Then Bumpy turned to face the 3 men on the floor. 2 of them were trying to sit up. The third was still motionless, face pressed against concrete, breathing in shallow pulls that fogged the dust near his mouth. Bumpy crouched down next to the one with the dislocated shoulder, spoke in a voice that carried no anger, no emotion, nothing but the weight of inevitability. You do not survive what comes next, not the way you are now. Every crew in 5 boroughs is going to know your faces, know what you did, know you are not worth protecting. He stood and gestured to his men. They dragged the guards out one at a time, boots scraping across the floor, leaving dark smears on concrete that would stay there until the building was torn down 8 years later, loaded them into a truck that would take them somewhere quiet, somewhere they could be reminded that the worst punishment is not dying. It is living with everyone knowing you failed. The whole thing took 90 seconds from the time the door broke to the time the last guard was loaded into the truck. 90 seconds to dismantle 3 lives and rewrite the rules about what happened when you touched people who were supposed to be off limits. Nobody outside that crew would ever know exactly what those 90 seconds looked like, because the men who were there understood that some details do not get shared. They get buried in the same graves as the reputations of people who learned too late what precision violence actually means. The noise ended fast. The consequences were just starting. The basement was not designed for what it became. Just a storage room under a Harlem tenement. Concrete walls slick with moisture. A single bulb swinging from a wire that hummed with current. But it had a door that locked from the outside and no windows, which made it perfect for conversations that needed to happen away from witnesses and recording devices. They brought the guards in one at a time. Started with the youngest, the one whose hands had shaken when Bumpy's crew pulled him out of the truck, sat him in a folding chair, zip-tied his wrist to the frame, not tight enough to cut circulation. Just tight enough that he could feel the plastic bite every time he tried to move. Then they left him there, alone. Light swinging overhead. Nothing to look at except water stains on the wall that looked like maps of countries that did not exist. 15 minutes of silence. No voices. No footsteps. Just his own breathing and the hum of the bulb and his imagination running scenarios about what came next. By the time someone finally walked back into the room, he was ready to talk. Bumpy did not even have to ask. The kid started spilling names before the door closed. Vincent Rossi, Arthur Avenue, a man named DeLuca who ran numbers out of a butcher shop, another named Carbone who had connections to a councilman in the Bronx. The words came out in a rush, sentences tripping over each other. Desperation making him articulate in ways fear usually prevents. Bumpy stood against the wall, arms crossed, listening without interrupting. Let the kid empty himself. Let him believe that cooperation would buy him something other than a slightly less terrible outcome. When the names stopped coming, Bumpy spoke. One question. Measured. Calm. Who gave the order to take my brother? The kid hesitated. Not because he did not know, because saying it out loud made it real, made him a rat in a world where rats did not retire, they just disappeared. But the alternative, sitting in that chair wondering when the pain would start, was worse than any label. He gave up the name. A man named Sal Martino, capo in the Lucchese family, the one who wanted Harlem open for business under new management. Bumpy nodded once. Did not smile, did not threaten, just walked out of the room and sent someone else in to cut the kid loose. The second guard, the one with the chain, was harder. Older, had been through interrogations before and thought he knew how they worked. Thought if he kept his mouth shut long enough, someone would get impatient and move to threats. And threats meant he still had leverage, still had something to negotiate with. They sat him in the same chair, tied his wrists the same way. But this time, they brought in a second chair and placed it 5 feet in front of him, put a rope on the seat, not touching him, not threatening him. Just there. Let him look at it and wonder what it was for. Then they left him alone for 30 minutes, long enough for his brain to cycle through every possibility. Long enough for the silence to become louder than any question they could have asked. The confessions that came out of that basement were never recorded, never written down, never presented in any court or included in any official record, because the moment they were spoken, they became something more dangerous than evidence. They became ammunition, and ammunition in the hands of men like Bumpy Johnson did not get wasted on trials. When Bumpy came back, the guard was already talking, not because anyone had touched him, because isolation had done the work. He confirmed what the first one said, added details, described meetings, explained how the plan was supposed to provoke Bumpy into public violence so the city could justify cracking down on Harlem's independent operators. Clear the board for families that played by rules written in boardrooms and church basements instead of street corners. Bumpy listened, asked follow-up questions, got names of drivers, bagmen, lawyers who filed paperwork that made illegal money look legitimate, built a map in his head of everyone who touched this, everyone who knew, everyone who would need to be reminded that Harlem was not for sale. The third guard never made it to the chair. Bumpy met him in the hallway outside the basement and asked one question. You want to walk out of here tonight, or you want to see how long 30 minutes alone feels? The guard talked, gave up everything he knew and some things he had only heard rumors about. Better to be a rat who lived than a loyal soldier who vanished. When protection disappears, loyalty dies right behind it. These 3 guards had been abandoned the moment Bumpy's crew pulled them out of that warehouse. Nobody was coming to negotiate their release. Nobody was paying lawyers. Nobody was making calls. They had been thrown away by the same people who hired them. And that realization, more than any threat Bumpy could make, turned them into sources instead of obstacles. By sunrise, Bumpy had a list. 12 names, addresses, routines, weaknesses, everything he needed to dismantle the operation piece by piece without firing a shot or giving the authorities a reason to care. He walked out of the basement and into the Harlem morning. The guards would be released in New Jersey with instructions to disappear. The real punishment was about to begin, and it would not involve basements or ropes or any of the things movies taught people to expect. It would involve phone calls and whispers and strategic leaks that turned allies into enemies and made powerful men realize their names were no longer worth the fear they used to command. Bumpy sat in his apartment with the lights off. Phone on the table. A glass of whiskey next to a notebook where names were written in pencil so they could be erased when this was finished. The kind of erasing that happened before bodies turned cold. Outside, Harlem slept. Inside, he was building the kind of silence that came before storms, the kind that made men wake up at 3 in the morning convinced they heard footsteps on stairs that were empty. He picked up the receiver and dialed a number he had memorized 3 hours earlier when the second guard coughed it up between sobs that sounded like drowning. 7 digits that connected to a phone in a back office at a social club on Arthur Avenue where decisions got made about who lived and who got forgotten. It rang 4 times. No greeting on the other end. Just breathing and the faint crackle of a radio playing Dean Martin like everything was normal. Like the world had not just shifted on its axis. Bumpy spoke first, voice flat, cold as January concrete. This is Bumpy Johnson. You have 10 seconds to get Sal Martino on this line before I hang up and start mailing pieces of your operation to the district attorney. Silence. Then footsteps running, muffled Italian curses that sounded like prayers said backward. Someone dropping something that shattered. Fear smelled the same in every language. 40 seconds crawled past. Then a new voice. Older. Gravel and cigarettes. The kind of voice that had ordered executions over breakfast and slept fine afterward. Oh, who the hell do you think you are calling this number at this hour? You got a death wish or you just stupid, Bumpy. Let 3 seconds of silence settle. Let Sal hear his own heartbeat. I am the man whose brother you used as bait. I am the man who has 3 of your boys in a basement right now giving me names so fast I am running out of paper to write them on. And I am the man telling you that you have 72 hours to pull every last one of your operations out of Harlem before I make this so personal. Your grandchildren will be apologizing for what you did. Sal laughed. It sounded hollow, forced, like a man trying to convince himself he was still in control. You think you scare me? You think you run anything that matters? You are just another nun who got lucky and thinks he is untouchable. I have buried 100 guys like you. Bumpy did not raise his voice. Did not need to. The threat was in the calm. I do not run the city. Sal. I run Harlem. And Harlem is not for sale. You wanted me to kick down your door with guns blazing. Wanted me to give you an excuse to call in favors and turn this into something public, where you could paint me as the animal and yourself as the victim. But I am not going to do that. I am going to do something worse. I am going to make you irrelevant. The breathing on the other end changed. Got shallow. Sal was calculating now, running numbers in his head, trying to figure out if this was a bluff or if Bumpy actually had the reach to burn him down. Bumpy kept talking, voice steady as a surgeon's hand. I am going to call every captain, every underboss, every politician you think you own. And I am going to explain to them that you are the reason the streets are about to run red, that you approved kidnapping a civilian, that you gambled with other people's lives on a plan that failed before it started, and when they ask you to justify it, you are not going to have an answer that keeps you breathing clean air. Sal tried to interrupt, but Bumpy rolled over him like a freight train. You have 72 hours. Pull your people out. Tell your bosses it was a misunderstanding. Get on your knees if you have to. Because if I see one of your guys on my streets after that, I am not coming for you with guns. I am coming for your reputation. I am going to leak every dirty deal you ever made to people who will use it to put you in a hole so deep you will forget what sunlight looks like. And your family, everyone who ever shook your hand. They are going to spend the rest of their lives explaining why they are not worth the bullet it would take to make the problem permanent. The phone line crackled. Sal swallowed hard enough that Bumpy heard it. Heard the exact moment the man realized he was not negotiating. He was receiving terms. Bumpy hung up. Did not wait for a response. Did not need one. The conversation was over the moment Sal picked up the phone and understood he was talking to someone who had already decided how this ended. Men who lived through that time, who saw Bronx crews vanish from Harlem like smoke within a week, still argue in barbershops about what was said on that call. But none of them argue about what happened after, because the results spoke in a language everyone understood. Real power is not making threats. It is ending the conversation while the other person is still shaking, while they are still wondering if they just signed their own execution order by saying the wrong thing. Bumpy poured the whiskey down the sink, watched it spiral into the drain like everything Sal thought he controlled. The work was done. The message sent. Now came the waiting to see if Sal was smart enough to save himself. The photographs were taken in a basement under a barber shop on 125th Street, where the floor was stained dark from decades of hair clippings and other things that did not wash out no matter how hard you scrubbed. White wall. Single bulb overhead. No shadows to hide in. 3 men stood in front of the camera. Faces swollen purple and yellow where fists had landed with the precision of men who knew exactly how much force it took to break a man without killing him. Each one held a piece of cardboard with their name written in black marker. Block letters. No room for confusion. The photographer was Ellis, a man who had spent 15 years documenting Harlem for magazines that never paid enough but kept him fed. He showed up at dawn with his Polaroid and asked no questions, because asking questions was how you ended up in front of the camera instead of behind it. 3 shots each. Front angle, left profile, right profile, clinical, efficient, the kind of documentation that would survive in desk drawers and safe deposit boxes long after the men in the photos were dust. Bumpy laid the developed photos on a table and studied them like a general reviewing enemy positions. These were not trophies. They were ammunition, proof that the men who thought they could operate without consequences had been identified, catalogued, and marked for elimination from the economy that kept the underworld functioning. He slid the photographs into envelopes, 9 total, each addressed to a different location where men gathered to trade money and secrets. sports books in Brooklyn where fortunes changed hands on bad calls and fixed fights, card rooms in Queens where poker games lasted 3 days and ended with someone limping home lighter than they arrived, social clubs in the Bronx where old men pretended to play dominoes while younger men planned robberies in back rooms that smelled like cigars and cheap cologne. Inside each envelope was a single typed letter. No signature, no letterhead. Just words that carried weight because everyone knew where they came from and what happened to people who ignored them. The men in these photographs are no longer welcome in New York City. They violated agreements that keep our operations running without drawing heat from authorities or competitors who would love an excuse to move in. If you employ them, you employ liabilities. If you trust them, you trust men who will bring federal attention to your doorstep. If you protect them, you paint a target on your own back that I promise you do not want. These men are advised to leave the city within 7 days. Find work somewhere far away. Live quiet lives. Pretend they never knew how things operated here. Forget every name they ever heard in rooms where business got conducted. If they stay, every door that used to open will slam shut. Every favor they think they are owed has been canceled. Every connection they built over years will evaporate like spit on a hot sidewalk. This is not a negotiation. This is a correction. The kind that happens when someone mistakes tolerance for weakness. Bumpy handed the envelopes to 3 runners he trusted. Men who had been with him long enough to know that delivering a message was sometimes more dangerous than pulling a trigger. Told them to hand the envelopes directly to the owners. Wait for confirmation. Report back. By noon. All 9 had been delivered. By sunset, word spread through the 5 boroughs like a virus. 3 men had been erased, not killed. Erased. Removed from the ecosystem, turned into ghosts who still breathed but no longer registered as alive to the people who mattered. The first one, the kid who cried in the basement, tried staying for 3 days, went to his usual spots, called people who used to answer. Found out that phones just rang and rang. Nobody had time. Nobody remembered him. By day 4, he bought a Greyhound ticket to Miami and disappeared into the kind of anonymity that swallows men whole and spits out nothing but rumors years later. The second one, the guy whose shoulder popped like a champagne cork in Bumpy's crew's hands, got arrested 2 weeks later on a parole violation he swore was fabricated. Sat in Rikers for 8 months waiting for a trial that kept getting postponed by judges who never explained why. By the time he got out, his connections were ash. His reputation was a punchline. He ended up washing dishes in a Newark diner, telling drunk customers he used to be somebody until they stopped listening and started laughing. The third one was smart. Left the same night Bumpy cut him loose. Took a train to Chicago. Got work pouring concrete. Kept his mouth shut for 43 years. Died in his sleep, without ever telling his wife or kids that he used to run with men who thought they controlled the world, until they learned what real control looked like. People whispered about it for decades afterward, because men who got erased usually ended up in landfills or river bottoms where crabs fed on their faces until dental records were the only way to identify what was left. But these 3 were allowed to live, and somehow that was worse. And that fact alone kept the story alive longer than any murder ever could. Execution ends in a moment. Exile stretches across a lifetime. Every morning you wake up knowing you used to matter, and now you do not. Every time you see someone who might recognize you, you flinch. Every door that closes sounds like the one that shut on your old life. Bumpy did not need to kill them. He just needed to make sure that when people heard their names, they remembered failure, remembered hubris punished, remembered what happened when you thought you could play in a game that required more than muscle and mouth. That lesson outlasted everyone involved, turned into folklore. The kind of story old men told in dim bars to young men who thought they were tougher than the generation before them. Clean. Willie left Harlem on a Tuesday in March when the air still bit cold and the platform at Penn Station smelled like diesel and yesterday's piss. No fanfare. No tears. Just a train ticket to Philadelphia and an address scribbled on paper that would dissolve if it got wet. Bumpy stood 20 feet back from the track, hands buried in his coat pockets, watching his brother climb the steps into a car that would carry him away from everything he knew, away from the dry cleaning shop, away from the neighborhood, away from the uncle who had saved his life by ending it in every way that mattered. Steam from the engine climbed into gray sky and disappeared. The train lurched forward. Metal screamed against metal. Willie did not look back. Bumpy did not wave. Some goodbyes do not get softened with gestures. They just happen, and then you live with the hole they leave behind. The 3 guards scattered like roaches when the lights came on. The kid made it to Florida where he cleaned boats at a marina and told tourists he was from Brooklyn. Never said Harlem. Never mentioned the warehouse. Never spoke the name Bumpy Johnson out loud even when he was alone, because saying it felt like summoning something that could still reach across state lines and finish what it started. He died at 53. Heart attack, while scrubbing barnacles off a yacht owned by a man who made his money in real estate and never asked where his help came from. They buried him in a county cemetery under a headstone that listed the wrong birth year because nobody cared enough to check. The one with the ruined shoulder served his time in Rikers and came out to a world that had forgotten him on purpose. No one returned calls. No one had work. No one wanted to be seen with a man who carried Bumpy Johnson's mark like a brand that never faded. He drifted through New Jersey. Day labor. Rooms rented by the week. Shelters when the money ran out. One winter he just stopped showing up to the church that served free meals, and nobody filed a missing persons report because you cannot miss someone the system never acknowledged in the first place. The tall, quiet one who tried to run made it to Chicago. Changed his name. Got a job pouring foundations for buildings that would outlast him by centuries. Married a woman who worked in a grocery store and never asked about the scar tissue on his knuckles or why he flinched when cars backfired. He lived 57 years after that night. Had 3 kids. Died watching television in a recliner that smelled like old leather and cigarettes he had quit smoking a decade prior. His family found a shoebox in his closet after the funeral. Inside were newspaper clippings about Harlem, about a man named Bumpy Johnson, about a warehouse. They burned it all without reading past the headlines because some stories are better left buried with the men who lived them. Harlem drew a line after that. Invisible but absolute. Family was sacred ground. Civilians were untouchable. You did not pull people into the life who had not chosen it themselves. And if you did not answer to police or judges or lawyers who filed motions and requested continuances. You answered to the kind of justice that happened in basements and back alleys and cars that drove to places where no one heard you scream. Other crews watched from a distance, saw what happened to men who crossed Bumpy Johnson, and decided their ambitions were negotiable. Within a month, Bronx operations pulled back. Queens stayed in Queens. Brooklyn focused on Brooklyn. Sal Martino retired. Claimed health problems. Nobody believed it. Nobody questioned it. The social club on Arthur Avenue changed hands. New owners made it very clear they had no interest in territory that belonged to someone else. And Harlem, for a while, breathed easier. Streets stayed open. Business continued. The balance held. But Bumpy paid for it in pieces of himself he would never get back. His brother was gone. The man who used to press shirts so crisp you could shave with the crease, who smiled at grandmothers and gave discounts to families barely scraping by. That man was in another city now, using a different name, building a life that did not include the uncle who had saved him by sending him away forever. People who lived through those years, who watched the neighborhood shift and settle into new rhythms. They never called it a victory, because victories are supposed to feel like celebration, and this felt like amputation. Necessary, but brutal. The kind that saves your life by cutting away parts of yourself you spend decades missing in the space between heartbeats. Bumpy walked back to his apartment, unlocked the door, hung his coat on a hook that had held it for 20 years, poured bourbon into a glass he would not finish, sat by the window and watched Harlem wake up to a morning that looked like every other morning, except everything was different. Power is not measured in bodies. It is measured in the silence after you speak, in the decisions people make when they think you are not watching, in the way your name gets whispered like a prayer or a curse depending on which side of the line you stand. Bumpy had built that, paid for it in blood that was not his and family he would never see again. Paid for it in sleepless nights and the kind of loneliness that comes from being respected by everyone and known by no one. The warehouse door closed in 1951. 3 men walked out alive but erased. That became the legend. The story Harlem told itself when it needed proof that justice still existed, even when the law looked the other way. The story it did not tell was about the man left behind. The man who won by losing everything that mattered. The man who understood that the cruelest thing you can do is not kill someone, but let them live knowing they will never matter again. That story lived in silence, in the empty chair at holiday dinners, in phone calls that never came, in the way Bumpy looked out his window every morning, wondering if his brother was safe, happy, alive, and knowing he would never ask because asking meant opening a door that had to stay closed, or everything he built would collapse. Willie never came back. Bumpy never called. Some doors stay shut not because they are locked, but because opening them would undo every sacrifice it took to close them in the first place. That warehouse door slammed shut in 1951. 3 men walked in. None walked out whole. Bumpy Johnson never saw his brother again. Never made that call. Because real power is not what you take. It is what you are willing to lose to keep others from ever testing you again. Some nights change history. Some doors close forever. If this story grabbed you by the throat, hit subscribe. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit hardest. And share this with someone who needs to understand that the most brutal victories are the ones nobody celebrates. More untold Mafia stories coming. Stay dangerous.